Hello everyone, my name is Dave, and this is part 7 of a video series where I'm going to show you how to create a tower-based defense game 100% from scratch using C++ and SDL2. In the last video, I improved the turrets so that they can target enemy units. In this part, I'm going to make it so that they can shoot projectiles that move towards enemy units. I'm going to start by setting up the basics of the projectiles. They're going to move in a straight line by incrementing their position a slight bit in every frame in the direction that they've been shot. I've created a new class called Projectile, and I'm going to add in some code that's very similar to what's already in the unit and turret classes. Just like before, I'm going to add a constructor, an update function, and a draw function. As you can see, there are a few errors that popped up, so I'm going to need to include a few things. I'm also going to add a few variables with private access for the position, direction normal, speed, size, and texture. Let's go to the CPP file. I'm going to set up the constructor so that it will set up the position, direction normal, and load the texture. I'm also going to initialize speed and size, which are static variables that defines how fast the projectile moves and how big its bounds are for collision detection purposes, respectively. I'm going to set up the update function. All it's going to do for now is move the projectile in a straight line by incrementing its position a slight bit in every frame in the direction that it's been shot. Next, I'm going to add the draw function, which is pretty much the exact same as the one in the unit class, so I won't go into any detail about it here. That's a pretty good amount of progress for the projectile class. Let's add it to the game class. This means that it needs to be included in the game header. I'm going to create a list that will store them, similar to how the turrets are stored, which means I'm also going to add a loop to the update function to update them, and another loop to the draw function to draw them as well. There needs to be a way to add the projectiles to the game. Of course, they're going to be shot by the turrets, so let's add some code there to do that. In the turrets update function, there's code that updates its rotation so that it can rotate towards the unit that it's targeting. I'm going to modify this code slightly so that it will tell us if the turret is pointing towards the unit or not. To do this, I'm going to copy and paste the code into a new function called updateAngle. It will output a boolean. It will be true if this turret is pointing towards its target unit and false otherwise. The default output is going to be false. For example, if there isn't a unit that it's targeting, or it won't reach its target in this frame. If it points directly at its target, then the output will be true. I'm also going to remove the piece of code that checks the absolute value of angle to target. I'm doing this to keep it simple. An alternate way would be to check if the absolute value of angle to target equals 0 and return true. However, most, if not pretty much all the time, the angle to the unit is changing because the unit is always moving, and therefore this alternate way of writing the code is just more complicating for no real benefit. Let's go back to the update function now and add the updateAngle function to re-add the code that was removed earlier. Because it outputs whether or not this turret is pointing towards an enemy unit or not, I'm going to call it in an if statement, and if true, then I'm going to call another function called shootProjectile that I'll be setting up next. It's going to need access to the projectile class, so I'm going to include it. The way it's going to work is it's going to check if a period of time has passed using a timer called timerWeapon. If that's the case, then it will add a projectile to list projectiles at the turret's position, pointing in the direction of the turret. Then the timer will be reset. This means that the timer class needs to be included in the header. I will also create a variable called timer weapon. Let's initialize it in the constructor to last for 1 second, meaning that the turret can shoot a projectile every second. It also needs to be updated in the update function. Because the shoot projectile function needs access to the renderer and list projectiles, they will need to be added as inputs to the update function as well. Of course, these inputs will need to be added in the game class where this function is called as well. Let's run the game and see what happens. Very nice. The turrets can now shoot projectiles towards enemy units. I'm going to add a breakpoint because I want to show you something important in the game class. Notice how list projectiles has a size of 37, meaning that there are 37 projectiles in the game. Of course, if you look at the game itself, they're nowhere to be found. So the question is, what's going on here? Well, the answer is simple. They're in the game, but they're off the screen. Because right now, there's no way for the projectiles to get removed from the game. There are a few ways that we could deal with this. The first is to simply check when a projectile has left the screen. Another way would be to track how far it's moved and see if it's gone beyond a maximum distance. In either case, the projectile would then need to be removed from the game. Oftentimes in strategy games like this, they use the second method, so that's what I'm going to do here. Of course, you could try implementing the other method if you wanted to yourself. This means that I'm going to have to add a variable called distance traveled max and another variable called distance traveled. Since distance traveled max is static, I'm going to have to initialize it in the CPP file, and for now I'm going to set it to be a distance of just a few tiles. In the update function, I'm going to modify the code slightly by creating a variable called distance move that will equal the speed multiplied by the time step. It will be added to distance traveled every frame. If distance traveled is greater than distance traveled max, then I'll set a variable called collision occurred to be true. It will be used to indicate that the projectile needs to be removed from the game. Therefore, I'm going to add a variable called collision occurred that will have a default value of false, indicating that a collision hasn't occurred by default, and a function that will return its output. This means I'm going to need to modify the code in the game class where the projectile is updated. Similar to the update units function, I'm going to add a function called update projectiles. It will loop through the list of projectiles, update all of them, check if each projectile has collided or not, erase it if needed, and update the iterator. Let's run the game and see what happens. Okay, very nice. You can clearly tell that the projectiles are getting removed because they disappear after they move a certain distance. When I add a breakpoint, you can see that there are no projectiles on list projectiles. Perfect. Because the level is so small, I'd rather that the projectiles can travel further, so that they can move anywhere on the level. Therefore, I'm going to switch the maximum distance that they can travel from 5 to 20 tiles. When I run the game again, you can see that they can now move anywhere. Very nice. The next step is to allow them to collide with and harm enemy units. However, this is a good place to stop for this video, and I'll start working on that in the next one. All the source code is available on my website, link is in the description. I've also got a bunch of other games, code, and tutorials on my channel and website, as well as a course where I create a falling sand platformer game 100% from scratch. Feel free to check those out if you're interested. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one.